Stand in the corner, Kayla. Your miserable face ruins the energy of your brother's signing. My mother, Amanda, physically shoved me away from the mahogany boardroom table before I could even sit down. Just pour the water properly, she hissed into my ear, her breath smelling of expensive espresso and cold disdain. Servitude is all you are good at. Do not let your bad luck haunt this family's money. I did not scream. I did not argue. I just walked to the side station, gripped the water pitcher, and checked the watch hidden under the edge of my silk sleeve. 4 minutes. That was all the time they had left before the reality they had built on a foundation of lies came crashing down. I stood in my designated corner and watched the performance. Welcome to Turning Tables Stories channel. I'm just here enjoying a quiet cup of coffee and watching the view. There's a stillness in this moment that feels like the heavy calm before Kayla's storm. I'd love to know where are you listening from today and what's your favorite drink right now. Let's return to that boardroom and see how the truth finally surfaces. Robert and Amanda were busy stroking Tyler's ego, their eyes glowing with a desperate kind of pride. To them, Tyler was the family's greatest asset, the golden boy who was about to secure their legacy. Tyler sat at the head of the table, leaning back in his chair with a smugness that made my skin crawl. He was talking about the partnership seat at Blackwood Partners, a seat he claimed was worth $350,000. It is about vision, Dad, Tyler said, his voice booming with unearned confidence. The big dogs in this city recognize a winner when they see one. This partnership isn't just a job, it is the throne. Robert, my father, nodded fervently, his hands still trembling as he reached for a pen he did not need yet. They were so blinded by the sparkle of Tyler's borrowed light that they could not see the shadows lengthening around them. They thought I was just the help, the miserable face ruining the atmosphere, but they did not know I had been auditing their lives for years. They did not know that 3 weeks ago, my algorithms had flagged Blackwood Partners as a sinking ship, a classic Ponzi structure gasping its final breaths. And they certainly did not know that 48 hours ago, I had used my private fund to complete a 100% debt acquisition of that very firm. I was not just a spectator in this room. I was the owner of the buzzsaw Tyler was about to walk into. He thought he was buying power, but he was actually purchasing his own professional execution. Every time he laughed, every time he leaned in to whisper a lie to Robert about fixing the numbers, he was just adding another line to his own indictment. The air in the penthouse felt heavy, thick with the scent of expensive cologne and the metallic tang of impending disaster. I could see the sweat starting to bead on Tyler's forehead, his fingers twitching toward his laptop bag, where I knew the forged bank statements were waiting. He was so close to the prize, so desperate to be the man our father always wanted him to be, that he had stopped thinking rationally. I looked back at my watch. 3 minutes now. The silence in the corner was my camouflage, and my discipline was my weapon. In their world, I was a liability, a sunk cost they regretted ever investing in. But on my balance sheet, I was the one who was about to close the books on this family forever. I tightened my grip on the water pitcher and waited. The trap was set, and all Tyler had to do was press send. I watched my father's hand hover over the mahogany desk, his knuckles white with tension. He had called me a sunk cost, an economic term for money already spent that can never be recovered. In his mind, every dollar spent on my survival was a loss on his personal balance sheet. To Robert and Amanda, children were not people. We were lines on a ledger, and I was the liability they regretted ever taking on. My silence in this corner is not weakness, it is a tactical necessity. For years, I lived in a house that felt like a prison without bars. It was an invisible chain forged from years of being told I was less than, a survival tactic that psychologists call learned helplessness. I did not scream when they shoved me aside, because I had learned that my voice had no currency in their economy. I became the invisible observer, the predator in the room, whose only camouflage was their own arrogance. They normalized this cruelty because it was easier than admitting Tyler was a bad investment. In their eyes, love was a financial transaction, and Tyler was the high-risk asset they refused to liquidate, no matter how much value he lost. They threw millions into the black hole of his failed restaurant concepts and totaled luxury cars, calling it investing in potential. Meanwhile, when I got into my graduate program for mergers and acquisitions, Robert told me the liquidity was not there. I did not ask again. I worked 3 jobs instead. I stacked pharmacy shelves from 10 at night until 6 in the morning, smelling like antiseptic and exhaustion, before heading straight to my statistics lectures. I graduated with 0 debt and 0 help from the people who were supposed to be my safety net. My clinical discipline in statistics paid off. While they spent, I invested. A series of high-risk algorithmic trades during the market dip turned my meager savings into a private war chest. I still remember that winter night years ago when the mask of family unity finally shattered. Tyler had lost $40,000 on a single weekend of gambling. Robert did not blame Tyler for the addiction, he blamed me for the solution. He demanded I drop out of school and hand over my hard-earned tuition savings to cover Tyler's debts. When I refused, he was not just angry, he was clinical. He told me I was a bad asset, and that he was cutting his losses. He kicked me out into the freezing cold, with nothing but my laptop and the clothes on my back. Back then, I believed him when he said I was a liability. I believed that love was a subscription I could not afford to pay. But standing here today, watching them scramble to keep the fantasy of Tyler's genius alive, I realized my compassion had been a luxury they had overdrawn for decades. This was not a family gathering. It was an accounting. And I was finally closing the books. The heavy glass doors swung open, and Bradley walked in with the posture of a supreme judge. He did not look like an ordinary auditor. He looked like a final verdict. He was a large man in a charcoal suit that cost more than my brother's car, carrying a leather portfolio with the cold indifference of someone who ruins lives for a living. Bradley walked straight past me without even a glance, treating me exactly as my parents did as part of the office furniture. Tyler stood up too fast, his knee hitting the mahogany table with a dull thud as he scrambled to offer a hand. "Mr. Bradley, it is an honor," he said, his voice forced and tight. Tyler was sweating through his expensive dress shirt, the damp patches visible even under his jacket, but he kept that practiced, arrogant smile fixed on his face. Robert beamed, pumping Bradley's hand with a desperation he tried to mask with booming hospitality. "We are ready to move forward," my father said. "My son is very excited about this partnership." Bradley sat down, opening his portfolio, as the air in the room grew heavy with the weight of the lies they were about to tell. "Excitement is good," Bradley said, his voice deep and smooth. "Solvency is better." From the corner, my mother snapped her fingers. The sound was sharp, like a dry twig breaking. "Kayla," Amanda hissed, pointing at the empty coaster in front of Bradley. "Water now. And try not to spill it this time. There are water spots on the marble, right in front of our guest." I picked up the pitcher and moved to the table. I poured the water into the crystal glass with absolute precision. Not a single drop wasted. There is a specific kind of power in being invisible. When people think you are nothing, they say everything right in front of you. They assume you are too small to understand the context of their crimes. As I filled Tyler's glass, I heard him lean in and whisper to Robert, "I fixed the file, Dad. It looks perfect." I heard my father's breath hitch as Tyler continued. "They will never know. The account only has $12,500. Tyler looked up at Bradley, his bravado returning like a cheap coat. He had no idea he was dancing on the edge of an abyss, or that I was the one who had already cut his safety rope. Bradley did not even touch the thick, cream-colored envelope Tyler slid across the mahogany table. He did not have to. He simply looked at me, his gaze as sharp as a razor. That was the signal. I stepped forward, pulling the damp towel from my arm and keeping my eyes lowered. I played the part of the nervous, incompetent assistant to perfection. "I am so sorry, Mr. Bradley," I said, my voice trembling just enough to be convincing. "I forgot to mention, The document scanner is down for maintenance, and the network is undergoing a security patch. Tyler's brow furrowed, his patience thinning as he felt the prize within his reach. So just take the hard copy, he snapped, gesturing toward the envelope. Bradley did not blink. He just checked his Rolex. Compliance requires a digital original for immediate federal wire confirmation to ensure absolute transparency. I lied smoothly, offering a helpful, apologetic smile. We cannot accept hard copies for an initial buy-in of $350,000. It is a strict security protocol. I turned to Tyler, holding out a small card with a printed QR code. Sir, if you could just forward the original PDF directly from your banking app to this system address, we can process it instantly on the main monitor. I gestured to the massive screen on the wall behind Bradley. Tyler froze. His hand twitched toward his laptop bag. I knew exactly what was happening in his head, the frantic mental math of a cornered animal. He did not have a banking app with $350,000 in it. He had a manipulated file on his hard drive. If he logged into the real bank, the charade ended right here. But if he sent the file he had carefully edited, he thought he would be safe. He thought he was just outsmarting a system that was too rigid for his genius. Right now? Tyler asked, his voice tight, the arrogance beginning to crack around the edges. Time is money, Mr. Tyler, Bradley said, his tone devoid of emotion. If we cannot verify the liquidity in the next 10 minutes, I have another candidate waiting in the lobby. Panic is a funny thing. It makes even the most calculating liars irrational. Tyler was so close to becoming the big dog in front of our father that he stopped weighing the risks. He pulled out his laptop and typed furiously, his eyes darting around the room like a trapped bird. I watched from my corner as he opened his email client. I watched him attach the file named Capital One Statement.pdf. I watched his finger hover over the mouse for a heartbeat before he hit send. A second later, the phone in my pocket vibrated against my leg. Ping. I looked down at the notification. There it was. The email, the attachment, the smoking gun. By transmitting a forged financial document across state lines via the internet to secure a business contract, Tyler had not just told a lie to his family, he had just committed a federal wire fraud felony in a room full of witnesses. And he had sent the evidence directly to the sister he called a failure. I looked up and caught his eye. He was smiling again, closing his laptop with a triumphant snap, thinking he had finally won. He had no idea he had just signed his own confession and handed me the pen. Bradley did not smile as he checked his tablet, acknowledging the digital receipt of Tyler's email. He simply nodded, as if a man transmitting a forged federal document was the most mundane thing in the world. The liquidity is verified, Bradley said, closing the folder with a clinical snap that Robert and Amanda mistook for a victory. However, Bradley continued, his voice devoid of emotion, per the fund's bylaws, there is a 24-hour clearing period for digital transfers of this magnitude. To lock in the partnership seat today before the international markets open, we require immediate collateral. He reached into his leather portfolio and pulled out a document bound in heavy blue legal paper. Bradley slid the document across the mahogany table toward my father. This is a personal guarantee and a deed of trust, he explained. It places a short-term lien on your primary residence as collateral until the wire transfer clears tomorrow. This is standard procedure for high-velocity deals. The room went silent. I saw my father's hand twitch. This was not just a signature. This house was his safety net, his retirement, and his entire legacy. Robert hesitated, looking at the document, then at Tyler. His eyes flickered to me in the corner. I made sure to look small, like the invisible daughter who did not understand the first thing about finance or property law. Is this necessary? Robert asked, his voice losing some of its booming confidence. You have the bank statement. Bradley glanced at his watch with practiced indifference. The board requires hard assets, Mr. Robert. If you are uncomfortable, we can offer the seat to the next candidate in the lobby. Tyler panicked and leaned in, his voice a desperate whisper. Dad, do not mess this up. It is only for 24 hours. The money is already in the system. Once I am a partner, my first bonus will pay for the Florida condo with the golf course view. You will be the envy of the whole club. Greed replaced fear. Robert signed the document. Bradley stamped it with a heavy clack thud. The house was now collateral. But as Bradley flipped through the final verification folder, he slid a piece of paper my way, asking for a witness signature. I looked down, and my blood turned to ice. It was the original deed from 20 years ago. I saw my grandfather's handwriting. He had not left the house to Robert. He had left it entirely to me. Then I saw the second page, a transfer document dated 7 years ago, my 21st birthday. I saw my name signed at the bottom, but it was not my handwriting. The loops were forced, the slant was wrong. My parents had forged my signature years ago to hijack my inheritance, just to bail out another one of Tyler's gambling debts. They had tricked me into signing a limited power of attorney on my 18th birthday, claiming it was for my college fund. For 7 years, they used it to intercept every bank notice and redirect my mail to a P.O. box I never knew existed. I was the owner of the house, yet I was paying them rent to live in my own basement. They did not just overlook me, they had committed a crime against me before I even knew what I owned. Anger was not loud this time, it was clinical. Tyler looked at me and smirked, leaning back in his chair. When I upgrade the security at the new estate, maybe I will hire you to watch the gates, Kayla, he laughed. You were so good at standing quietly in corners. Amanda laughed with him. With a better suit? Maybe. I set the towel down and reached for my phone. The audit was over. The execution was beginning. Actually, I said, my voice cutting through their laughter like a surgical blade, you won't be hiring anyone. I set the serving towel down on the mahogany table with a finality that seemed to echo in the silent boardroom. Robert barked at me to sit down and stop making a scene, but I ignored him. I pulled my phone from my pocket and plugged it directly into the massive monitor on the wall. Bradley stood up and gave a slight, respectful bow toward me. Everything is ready, boss, he said, his voice deep and certain. His earlier cold shoulder had been a calculated performance, a way to keep my family blinded by their own prejudice, until the trap was sprung. My mother's mouth fell open, her eyes darting between Bradley and me, in a frantic search for a lie that was not there. I tapped the screen. Document A flickered to life, the incorporation records for the debt fund that had just acquired Blackwood Partners. My father read the owner's name aloud, his voice cracking with a sudden, sharp realization. Kayla Vance. I bought the firm's distressed debt and triggered the change of control clause this morning, I said, looking Tyler directly in his sweating, pale face. I am now the sole managing member, and Bradley works for me. I swiped to document B, the real-time balance of Tyler's bank account, only $12,500. Tyler went a sickly shade of gray, the smugness he'd worn for decades sliding off him like cheap grease. And then there is document C, I continued, highlighting the technical metadata of the statement Tyler had just transmitted digitally. Metadata created exactly 1 hour ago. Font mismatch. This is a total forgery. I leaned forward over the table, no longer the invisible daughter, but the predator who had been watching them from the shadows. You just committed federal wire fraud, Tyler. The minimum sentence is 20 years in a federal facility. Robert dropped his pen, the plastic clattering against the marble floor like a death knell. It was just a placeholder, Kayla, Tyler whispered, his arrogance completely evaporated into raw panic. You were going to steal the $350,000, I stated flatly, using Dad's house as your personal shield. I placed 2 new legal documents on the table. Option A, I call the FBI. Tyler goes to prison for 20 years, and this estate is seized as part of the criminal investigation. Robert shook visibly, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. Option B, you sign a deed in lieu of foreclosure. You transfer the house back to my company immediately. I do not press charges, and Tyler stays free of a prison sentence. Amanda screamed that I could not do this to my own family, but I snapped back with lethal precision. You already lost the house the moment you signed that collateral agreement. Now you just have to choose which one of us takes it. My father looked at Tyler, then back at me. For the first time in 30 years, he understood who actually held the power in this family, and it was not the son he had bet his life on. Give me the pen, he said, his voice sounding thin and hollow. He signed the transfer. I slipped the deed into my portfolio and looked at my mother. Congratulations, Amanda. The bad luck you kept talking about is now your new landlord. I turned to Bradley. Wait in the car. If I do not walk out of this building in 5 minutes, send every digital file we have to the U.S. Attorney's Office. Bradley nodded and left the room without a single backward glance. I looked at Robert, the man who had called me a sunk cost just 1 hour earlier. Hope flickered in his eyes when I told him they could stay in the house, but I made the terms of the new agreement very clear. I would cover the property taxes and the essential maintenance, but the emotional accounts were closed for good. They were no longer the masters of the Oak Street estate. They were merely tenants in a house that had been stolen from my own heritage. Tyler remained on the floor, weeping as the reality of his foreclosed condo and shattered reputation finally set in. Kayla, please, it's all I have. He cried, looking up at me as if I were his last lifeline. Not my problem, I replied, the words tasting like absolute clarity. You are a liability, Tyler, and I am finally cutting you from the ledger. I watched as security escorted him out of the penthouse, his cries echoing down the hallway until the heavy glass doors clicked shut. I walked out into the Manhattan sunlight, feeling a weight lift that I had carried for 28 years. I realized then that my family's perceived power was nothing but an illusion, an empty wallet masquerading as an empire. Their authority was a luxury they had rented, with forged numbers and borrowed status. When the money vanished, the people they were supposed to be turned out to be empty shells. They had spent 3 decades focusing on having wealth while completely forgetting how to be decent human beings. This was not just a story of a debt being paid, it was a transition to a different kind of justice. While they spent their lives trying to tear me down to elevate their own egos, I was busy building something lasting in the shadows. True justice is not just about watching the villains lose everything. It is about using the fragments of a broken past to plant the seeds of a better future. I used the recovered assets to establish a foundation for students who, like me, were told by their own families that they were not worth the investment. I have come to realize that sometimes you have to become invisible to build an empire that your enemies can never touch. For years, I waited for a seat at their mahogany table, begging for a single scrap of validation, only to realize that I was meant to own the entire building. If you find yourself in a similar situation, if you are the liability or the burden in someone else's narrow world, remember this: do not ask for permission to shine. Your value is not a line on their ledger, and your future is not theirs to dictate. Forgiveness is not always about making peace with the people who hurt you. Sometimes it is the cold, quiet act of setting yourself free and moving forward into a life they no longer have the right to witness. Thank you for listening. If this story helped you realize your own value, please share it with someone who needs encouragement. Do not forget to hit the follow button so you do not miss the next lessons in justice.